Good evening. Hi, my name is Val Lasnitz. I'm the Planning Director for Howard County. Welcome. I want to thank you on behalf of the County Executive and the Department of Planning and Zoning for attending this really important planning meeting here on Ellicott City and the Watershed. We're about halfway through the planning process at this point, and we're excited for you to be here. One, because we've got a lot of concepts and ideas to unveil this evening and let you tell us what you think of them. So, tell us what you like and maybe what you don't like. So this is a great opportunity for you to provide that level of input. We also have our consultant team here this evening, Steve Brigham from Public Engagement Associates. He's been helping us through this entire process to help capture your ideas and to make them understandable to us. And he's been working on this project since the recovery meetings began last fall. And also Tom McGilloway is here from Mahan Reichel. Since we last had this meeting, Tom and his team have been working on a number of concepts that they will be sharing with you this evening. And again, this is an opportunity to tell us what you think. I also want to thank our Master Plan Advisory Committee. Could you all raise your hands, all those in attendance? They've been a great sounding board on ideas that have been generated so far, and they've provided direction and context for the ideas that you'll see this evening. They're residents, they're business owners, property owners, and community leaders who are committed to Ellicott City's future. And they've been invaluable in this process. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Councilman Weinstein. He was here a moment ago.
I'm still here.
Oh, there he is. I didn't recognize you without your jacket.
That's right, I'm a chameleon. Thank you very much, Val. Before I start, there's a gentleman in the back, Mark Miller. It's his birthday today. So yeah, happy birthday, Mark. He's the head of communications for the county and make sure the good word gets out about what's going on here in Howard County. But I just want to thank you all for taking your time. As Val described, this is yet another step in a process that's been going on since those, the fateful events on July of last year. So it doesn't get any more important than the conversations that have taken place since and will continue to take place over the next few months. Really excited. I had a quick preview of what you're about to see, some very interesting and exciting concepts. I'm anxious to hear some of the feedback that you're going to have. But I just really want to thank you all, the community volunteers who have taken on the role of being on this committee, being the sounding board, the MPAT, but also for each and every one of you taking time out of your day to give your feedback, to be part of this process, and really be part of the future of this great community that we all love. So thank you very much. I look forward again to hearing your thoughts, and please be honest and be specific with your recommendations. Thank you, Steve.
So good evening, everybody. I'll try not to... Which mic do you want me to use? This one? All right. I'll try not to do that again. So good evening. Great to see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces. We have a very packed agenda tonight because there's a lot of stuff to review and get your opinions and feedback on. So let me first get started with the purpose. So we actually have not had a formal public meeting since July, although there was pop-up meetings in September on Main Street. Tonight we are going to be sharing where we are in the process and what's gone on since we were all convened actually in this room many months ago. Share some of the assessment that's been going on and the highlights around that. Review some emerging recommendations based on the assessment, some possibilities of what might work, and those are the kinds of things that we want to get your perspectives on. And then at the very end of the meeting, share what are the next steps, what's going to be happening between now and January, January being the next public meeting, and then again in March. So tonight's agenda, like many of these meetings, we'll do a few opening polling questions just to get a sense of who you are and in relationship to Ellicott City. We're going to get a brief presentation from some county officials about progress that's been made in the watershed and in historic Ellicott City. And then we're going to go through a series of presentations that will then be followed by Q&A and then some table discussion, which is why, again, we're set up in round tables. And that at the end of each of the discussions, we'll hear some quick call-outs from people so you can share some of the ideas that you talked about at your table. And then we'll do polling at the end of each of those segments so we can get a sense of what seems promising to you. So we're going to do that around a whole host of issues. I'm not going to read all these 4 bullets here, but Tom McGilloway from Mahan Reichel will be walking you through each of those. So that's what the night looks like. We're going to do kind of 4 series of presentation, discussion, call-outs, polling, etc. And then you'll hear next steps at the very end of the meeting. So just very quickly on process and ground rules. So in the past, in some meetings, we've actually provided staff at each table to serve as facilitators, but tonight we are empowering you to facilitate your own conversations. And so as you're having conversations, it's important to really pay attention to a few things. One is to make sure that no one's dominating at your table. Another is to make sure that those people who may be on the quieter side get a chance to share their perspective, and that kind of everyone gets equivalent airtime as we're talking through the different possibilities. We do have worksheets for you at the table for each of the different discussions you're going to have, as well as a couple of junctures where we're not going to have a discussion, but we're wanting your feedback. We're planning to have those collected at the end of the night. So each person should have your own set of worksheets. Please, especially for things that you want to make sure the county and Tom's team get feedback on, to write whatever notes, ideas, feedback, etc. on those worksheets so we can collect them at the end of the night. And make sure that it's written legibly, because you'd be surprised at how many worksheets we get. It's like, what is that word there? And did we get the right word? I think the other thing to say is it's going to be a long meeting. It's going to move quickly. We're not going to be able to capture every single idea in a conversation or answer every single question. So be ready to move fast with us so we can get through each of the rounds and get your feedback. And again, if there are things that don't get covered or you don't get to share, make sure they get captured on the worksheets so we can collect them at the very end of the night. So with that, next slide. So as we've done with a number of these meetings, we do have polling keypads for you. They should be at the center of your table if you can grab one right now. This is a system that's really easy to use. We're going to pose a question. There will be a number of options presented that you can vote for. You vote for the option that is meaningful to you or is kind of the right answer for you. If you make a mistake and the polling hasn't closed, you press 2, you wanted to press 3, you can press 3 and the system will take your last vote. And I'll explain to you when we get to it. It's a little different process when we're doing multiple choice votes, and if there happens to be a question with up to 10 responses, 10 on your keypad is 0. All right, so we're just going to do 3 quick questions now. The first is, what is your relationship in the historic Ellicott City watershed? And so this is the only question, I think, in the night where it's press all that apply. So if you live, shop, and worship there, you press 1 and 4 and 5, and the system for this question will take all 3 of your votes. I guess the music's on delay. All right, so let's see the responses. All right, so the top one, almost 2/3 shop in historic Ellicott City. More than half live in historic Ellicott City. 41% own property. A little more than 1/3 work there. 22% own a business. So you have numerous relationships to historic Ellicott City, which is probably why you're here. So that's really important for us to know. Thank you very much. Next question. So how long have you lived, worked, or regularly visited, meaning shopped, dined, worshipped in Ellicott City? So it goes from 1, I don't live, work, or regularly visit, all the way up to 5, more than 20 years. What is the best response for you? All right. Everyone have a chance to vote? There you go, dancing at the back table, I love it. All right. So we have a real mix here, but the biggest number here is 47% more than 20 years. So we have a lot of long-termers here, but we also have 30% that are 10 years or less. So a real nice mix of folks who've been here quite a while and folks who are a little bit newer to historic Ellicott City. Then final question for this round. So we've had 2 workshops so far, May 31st and July 7th. Just wanting to know if you attended one or both. If you just attended one, you can just put yes. Obviously, if you didn't attend either, no. All right, let's see the responses. All right, so almost 2/3 of you have been to one or both of those workshops. Another third have not, so welcome to all those folks who have not been an active part of the public meeting process. Hopefully this is not the only time that you'll be involved now going forward. Now I want to quickly bring back Councilman Weinstein. He has one more thing that he'd like to share with you. Can we just get this mic on here real quick?
Yeah, well, it's on. Great, thank you. So I neglected to introduce my friend and the delegate for this area. Bob Flanagan's here as well and has been obviously an active part. He and I have been working together since day one on this, and appreciate seeing you here tonight. So I'm sorry, I forgot. For those of you who get it, I've been forgetting some things lately, so this one I wanted to fix as quickly as I could. Thanks.
All right. So now we're going to get a quick update from Phil Nichols and Mark DeLuca from the county executive's office. And so I'm going to start with Phil, who's going to update you on county projects to date.
Thank you, thank you. As I know most of you in this room already, but for those who don't, my name is Phil Nichols. I serve as the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for Howard County, and I work for County Executive Kittleman. Really, Mark is going to get into the meat of the matter here, but I just wanted to hit on a couple items. Can you hit the slide? Let's see. Oh, you got it. Yeah, thank you. So I mean, it's amazing looking back a year from now, you know, how far we've come. It's incredible. I mean, we've had 94% of businesses come back with one more on the way, and it's because of all of you. I mean, it's been a community effort with the county working with the community the entire way, and we've done incredible things here. And it's impressive. It's really impressive to look back and to see how much we've been able to accomplish together. But I just wanted to say that and intro Mr. DeLuca, who can go into a little bit more depth, about a lot of the infrastructure projects that you've been seeing constructed over the last year and change.
Thanks, Phil. I'm Mark DeLuca, the Deputy Director of Public Works and also the Chief of, got one fan, and also the Chief of Environmental Services. Stormwater is within that Environmental Services group. So what the slide is showing in the background, and I don't know how visible it is for people in the back, but I'm sure that you've seen some of these projects if you've been walking around. Several of the stream walls were damaged during the flood, and we were fortunate enough to obtain a grant from NRCS, which is actually a part of USDA, and to rehabilitate these walls. So, and most notably, the picture at the top is a wide-angled shot of the wall between lots F and E, where we did both sides of the stream. We rebuilt it, and of course we tried to be historically true. We replaced it not with concrete but with just the stone walls, so they're just heavy stone walls. There is one concrete part, and that was where there was a parking pad, and we felt that we had to use concrete there, but we did put a stone veneer over top of it. The other project that it shows here is actually a little piece of Rex and Parks property, but it's further up on West Main, where we worked with the homeowner and rebuilt the county portion of the wall. And the last picture is, I don't know where that last picture is, the HC Theater. That's the old, right on the corner of Old Columbia, Pike, and Main Street. And we, same thing there, we just tried to stay true to the historical significance of the stone and just replaced it with stone walls. In addition, if I can get this to work. In late July or early August, County Executive Kittleman had a press conference down on Main Street at the B&O Museum. And at that time, he announced 4 projects that we would move forward with to try and that would help mitigate flooding. And these came out of the McCormick-Taylor H&H study, which if you were at one of the last meetings, you saw that. The picture on the right-hand side of the slide is a depiction of the entire watershed in Ellicott City. The picture on the left is there were 4 projects that were listed. One of them is on the Tiber, and the picture on the left just depicts the size of the pond on the Tiber. There was also a pond, a large retention pond planned for the New Cut branch, and we call that NC3. And then on the Hudson, the pond on the Hudson was called H7. And I should note that the reason why they're called, H7 and not H1 was that, from the entire study, there were 8 locations in the Hudson where there was to be some type of stormwater treatment, either retention, surface retention, a retention pond like this one, or maybe a pipe farm, or maybe culvert improvements, and so they all had their own number. But H7 is the large pond, and it's going to be located in the interchange of Route 29 and Route 40. And then the conveyance systems, which are just, there are some pinch points where we think we could get better conveyance from storm drains along Frederick Road or West Main Street, and that's the 4th project that we're moving forward with. All these projects are in design currently, and some are a little further on than others. This probably will be the first project to actually come out of the ground. And however, like H7, for example, we are in talks with State Highway Administration, and we are moving forward with that as well as the Tiber project. And that's it for the projects. And of course, if you have any questions about any of it, we can either talk about it now or just one brief question.
Sure. Theo? Kristen?
Check. Can you give us any kind of timeline on the next steps for each one of the projects that you guys have announced already?
All the projects are moving at approximately the same rate, but they're all slightly different from one another. So they're all in the design process right now, and we're doing that with the funding that's available to us right now. So we really only hope to get through design, and then in the next fiscal year, we should be ready for some construction. And so we'll be asking for the construction dollars in the next fiscal year. So that's the basic timeline for right now, because we're in the design process.
Fiscal year is
Well, it would be
July
the
1.
fiscal year 19, which starts July 1, 2018. All right.
Mark, can you tell us how much water all these projects will actually retain? Is it 100-year flooding? Do you have any statistics?
So a lot of this has already been covered, probably most appropriately when we did the presentation on the H&H study, Frank. So, but if you're talking about this specific group of projects, there are several others. This is really the first phase of all those projects. And so what I would say is that you should anticipate this to, even though we're working on this and we're doing it as a group of projects, it's phase one of those projects. And if this first phase takes 2 to 3 years for us to get in the ground, and then there will be a phase two where we'll do more projects. But it's a long-term effort, and so that's the way. So I hope that I just want to express that that's what the expectation should be. These won't be overnight projects. They're way too large for that, and they're expensive as well. So this is the first batch. So that's the reason why I call them phase one. And so these projects should take from the time they were announced last summer, August, to it should take a good 3 years to finish them. So I'm going to turn it over to. Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
I need you to stand up because they're filming this, and maybe you do need.
Barrington, 8600 block. And we was wondering, or I was wondering, you said pinch point. Did you mean the single culvert at the 8600 block is going to be the first thing you said you start on as far as the pinch points? Because we've had a couple floods there since the one in just last year.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'll just go back one slide. Maybe one more. No. Yeah, you were correct. So this project right here, so there is a pipe that goes across the road near West End, goes over to West End Auto, and so that's the main. It's a group of culvert projects. This. Conveyance improvements, but the primary focus will be that large pipe that goes across the road.
That's going to be your next first big project.
Right. Now the wall that's there, I'll just give a little bit more information, and then I want to keep things on schedule. The wall that's there that fell, we're in the process of bringing a contractor on right now who will design and build that wall. And so we do anticipate that sometime this winter that wall will be reconstructed. The pipe is a different project. And off the top of my head, I really can't remember when, can't remember a schedule for that, but that's the next priority, is that pipe. And that pipe is one of the pinch points that I was talking about.
Hasn't been, watered since World War II.
Yeah.
We've got, hundreds and hundreds more buildings and rooftops that came up, and roadways and sidewalks. We don't need any more sidewalks up on Main Street. So I see you have sidewalks in here. That wouldn't make any sense with all the water we have already, So I wouldn't. I mean, I'd prefer to, we already have one sidewalk on one side of the street. We really don't need any more sidewalks. Until we get this done. This is probably the most important job to get done. Instead of having water in our basements and water, on our ground and water in the road, mud on our shoes if we walk in our house, it's still terrible.
Right.
Nothing's been.
And I appreciate hearing that because it is one of our priority projects that we are moving forward with. So it's good to know that. So it's good to know. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve.
Thank you, Mark. All right, so Thank you again to Mark and Phil for giving us an update. Now I'm going to ask Tom McGilloway from Mahan Reichel to come up, and you're going to be seeing a lot of his face tonight, as well as other members of his team. He's going to do a set of presentations. Are there handouts linked to this, or handouts are?
All the handouts are at the tables.
Okay, so there are handouts on some of the key slides here. So there's going to be a presentation. At the very end of it, we're going to do some Q&A. Then we're going to ask you to write some feedback on your worksheets, and then we're going to do one quick poll and then move to the next set of presentation. So please welcome Tom McGilloway and his team.
Thank you, Steve. So I'm going to, it's good to be back here. I'm going to stand over here so I'm not giving myself whiplash between two screens. First, I want to introduce our team members that are here tonight. Megan Griffith and Jeff Doobie from our firm, who've been doing a lot of background work. Stacy Pear over at the wall there, and then Matt Tomlinson, RK&K, and Trip Muldrow from Arnett Muldrow Associates. So where we are in the process, we're midway in the process here. We're right here. This is where we were in July. We're going here. The draft plan will be in March. This wavy line on the bottom is the input that we're getting from you all. It's an iterative process. So one of the things I want to stress as you look at ideas tonight is that the ideas that we have, these are concepts and ideas we're exploring. They're not set in stone. We're here to get your reaction to them. So even though they might be on a page printed on your table or you see them up here, don't look at them as cast in stone. We want to get your input on those concepts. So the focus of tonight is some transportation, parking issues, some downtown opportunity sites. We've been working in some separate meetings on some organizational structure. We're not going to cover that tonight. And then Trip's going to give some highlights of the market assessment that we'll be going into more detail with the merchants tomorrow. In January, now it may be the week of January 15th or the following weekend, we'll be coming back with additional recommendations. The opportunity sites that we're talking about tonight, McCormick Taylor just finished some additional hydraulic modeling of that we haven't had a chance to really analyze yet. So we'll be analyzing these opportunity sites we talked about tonight based on that model and coming back with further recommendations. We'll also be having beyond street and transportation related more focus on West End and watershed-wide recommendations and updates in that January meeting. What's happened since July, we've done zip code surveys, market analysis, transportation. We've had pop-up engagement at Music Fest. We've been doing a lot of coordination with McCormick Taylor, and then we've been testing different scenarios and options that we want to get your input. Music Fest, great participation. We got a lot of input about daylighting streams, more public green space, more public art, and so forth. We had a lot of residents participate, also a lot of visitors, and a lot of visitors from very far away. So we had good input at that. Some assessment highlights. We want to get into the recommendations. So Trip's going to talk a little bit about the market analysis, so I'll leave that. Main Street, we really come to the conclusion, we heard a lot about more pedestrian space, but also the need for parking. We think there's really a need to maximize flexibility, and you'll see that when we get into the concepts there. Parking resources, one of the things I want to stress is that overall parking counts are sufficient today. Parking may not be located where we really want it to be all the time, but the counts are sufficient. But any conversation we have about parking decks tonight, parking decks allow other strategies to happen. We heard a lot about more open space, daylighting streams. In order to do that, the areas where you can do that are in some of the surface lots. So a parking deck allows you to look at some of those strategies. Parking management, we're not going to get into that tonight, but parking management is very woven into physical parking strategies. Hydrology, there's really a number of strategies involved. It's a balance of not only the retention ponds, but as Mark talked about, conveyance and minimizing pinch points. So we'll be talking about some different ideas there. Urban design and placemaking, art, lighting, will hit on stream amenities, the environment, recognizing Ellicott City as a place of discovery, and we'll be hitting on some of those tonight. Community marketing, we'll be hitting that more in March, but looking at how does Ellicott City market itself as really an authentic experience and a place that you park the car once and spend the day. We're looking at organization structure, again, not tonight, but in some meetings that we're having over the next 2 days. And then we're looking at watershed-wide assessment and, you know, some of the things that we've heard a lot and are analyzing our overlay districts, connections. We've heard a lot about the need for better connectivity, character-based codes that can inform some of the work that the county's doing with zoning, and then some of the opportunities with some of the redevelopment parcels, analyzing the best way to move forward on those. We've developed a series of exhibits. I'm not going to get into the details here, but looking at the overall watershed, looking at the watershed, what's impervious coverage, what development has been done pre-stormwater management and after stormwater management, and this will help guide some of our recommendations. And then looking at the core, some of the specific opportunity sites, and this is really where our focus is this evening. So Trip, market summary, hit on some of the high points there.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to hit on some of the highlights. There is a lot to the market analysis, so if I were to get into it, I would keep you here all night long. We did this through a zip code survey. We did 2 different surveys, one in July, one in September. It helped us define the trade area based on zip code for Ellicott City, for the Old Town area. And from there, we were able to pull some demographics, look at retail leakage, and then draw some conclusions. And I'm going to hit on a bit of that tonight. In the 2 surveys, the merchants were wonderful in cooperating with us, and for any of you in the room who own businesses who participate, we thank you. We'll be going in greater detail on this tomorrow. They recorded 2,272 customer visits during basically a 14-day period, 2 different times, July and September. 396 unique American zip codes passed through Ellicott City during that survey period, representing 38 states in the District of Columbia and 4 foreign countries. Pretty remarkable data. To see the diversity of people that are coming through the community. At the end of the day, the downtown remains an area where it's a mixture of visitors that come through and locals. About a third of the folks who came through are from the 21043 or 21042 Ellicott City zip code. In fact, about 1 in every 5 customers was from 21043. And we're defining that as your primary trade area. That population is about 90,000 people in the 2 Ellicott City zip codes. And then we're counting Catonsville. That was your next most prolific customer base from Catonsville. And then the 2 Columbia zip codes, 21045 and 21044. And then Woodstock and Elkridge, which is what we're calling the secondary trade area. And that combined population is about 175,000. When you look at the population of both the primary and secondary trade area, they have been consistently growing robustly over the past 20 years, and they're projected to continue to grow over the next 5 years as well. You really do attract a significant amount of customers from outside the region, but for visitors to Ellicott City, it would not be the vibrant business district that it is. We're looking at probably about 1 in every 5 customers is from away. And so that's a really important thing, is that this district caters to both the locals and to visitors. But the trade areas themselves, what people spend inside the Ellicott City zip codes compared to what stores sell, there's actually a delta. So if you live inside one of the 2 Ellicott City zip codes, customers there spend $761 million more than stores sell inside those zip codes. If you live in Columbia, if you live in Elkridge, if you live in Catonsville, That secondary trade area of 175,000 people, those zip codes also leak sales to the tune of $510 million. And so it's a bit of a interesting dynamic, but we're looking at $1.27 billion that people who live in these zip codes spend every year outside of the immediate area. The opportunity then exists when we factor in that the area is growing, the area is leaking sales, there are visitors that come into the district, there are opportunities for additional retail, restaurant, entertainment growth over time. And some of the most important things that we see are food related. And we see this as a growing trend nationally with restaurants, both full service and limited service. We also see this in things like specialty food. We see it in even grocery items, ethnic grocery, and you do have a lot already, but there's opportunity for more. And how does that manifest itself in the district? Things like home furnishings are also things that are very interesting. That leak sales, it matches very well with the kind of district that Ellicott City is. And I wanted to make the distinction. Home furnishings are not your sofa and your bed. They're the things that you put on your sofa and bed, the pillows and the accessories and the things that you decorate with. And then we also see some opportunity for finer grain things like jewelry stores, pharmacies, and others. There are other retail opportunities, and by no stretch of the imagination are we suggesting that the leakage that we're seeing in building supply home centers and auto dealerships be located in Old Town Ellicott City is just sort of worthy of note. When you see that big number of leakage, a good chunk of that is happening in some of these categories that would not locate in a historic district. We also see Arundel Mills is sort of getting sort of sidewind captured into this, which really skews the clothing data. But I want to make an important note that the kind of clothing shopping that's done at an outlet mall of Arundel Mills nature is really quite different than what you would experience in a specialty district like Ellicott City that would have mom and pop and specialty clothing stores. At the end of the day, things like food and food-related businesses really represent some of the most significant opportunities for Ellicott City. Even though we've seen Catonsville grow in the dining category over the past several years, this opportunity still remains a strong leakage piece. And then certainly this does point to the need possibly for some larger footprint buildings within the core of the community to be able to accommodate some of the food service related businesses if that's a decision that the community wishes to make. And so there's a lot more to that, but we'll certainly be getting into that tomorrow. You want me to keep going?
We'll also be talking about the draft master plan narrative. This is a narrative, if you could, we've heard a lot in our meetings about what is Ellicott City. That question was raised quite a bit. We heard a lot of quotes, Ellicott City is the sum of its parts, will never be a convenient place. The ins and outs, the ups and downs, there's discoveries. That's what makes us such an appealing place. If we go to the next slide, when we had the family game here, when everyone in the meeting at the last July meeting described Ellicott City as a female, and just are some of the characteristics they describe, tough cookie, artistic, shapely, one of a kind, cares about what she looks like. And so these all helped inform how we describe the community. And in the next slide, what this narrative does, it helps inform as we develop a vision and mission statement for the plan. It becomes a litmus test for reviewing proposals and improvements to always understand what we're about, and then it can inform some of the community marketing strategies that Tripp will be exploring in March. And then do you want to say anything else about the statement?
No, I think this is good. It's important that we have this narrative, and one of the nice things about my job is I get to use my right brain and my left brain. So after a day of crunching numbers on market analysis, I get to work on things like this narrative, and I hope you'll indulge me as I read through that, and I'm going to have Tom advance the slides as I read it so I'm not craning my neck. This narrative, as Tom said, really does serve as a guide, and just indulge me. I'll try and get into my radio voice and apologize in advance for my southern twang here. We are Ellicott City. Ellicott City is an emblem of the American experience. We're not a place built around a single event, contrived from a relic, are predictable in setting. We're a continuum of histories that connect the earliest geologic times through waves of settlement. We're an indigenous people, early explorers, a center for agriculture, and a place where democracy and independence helped define a nation. We're the very birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution. We're not merely a historic community, we're a community making history. Ellicott City is defined by water, formed by the Patapsco and its tributaries. We've bridged the waterway since our founding in 1772. The relationship we've built leveraged the water to create our economy and continues to shape our community to the present day. The water invites discoveries, big and small. It crafts a place of ups and downs, ins and outs, among both built and natural settings. Beyond the water, the larger environment envelops and sculpts our form. We're a city that's built to conform to the hills. The slopes, the rock, and the soil are as important to our setting as the buildings we occupy. We're not a place built in a modern era, centered on cars, codes, and standards, but a place built through a creative response to the landscape. Ellicott City's relationship to the land and water is indeed precarious, offering challenges and opportunities unlike any other place in our region. Yet our historic, environmental, community, and cultural resources more than offset the steep slope of the hills, the rush of the waters, and the turn of the streets. We are not one size fits all. People come to Ellicott City to live, work, and play amidst our historic setting. We're a place where visitors are welcome to explore our shops, our setting, our culture, and our past, embracing our mills, the B&O Railroad, the National Road, landmark Ellicott City Colored School, and our rich architectural heritage. We leverage our history and our distinct setting as a place that embraces everyone through our culture and our connection to the land. Ellicott City is the legacy of many generations, and we nurture and grow this place to ensure it is truly special for future generations. Ellicott City is a place of layers. We're not a city of grand icons, towering buildings, or broad parks, rather a city molded by our environment and built in response to our setting, the hills, waterways, and streets. Most importantly, we're a place where people have come together over many generations, a place where our citizens have responded with resiliency to its challenges, a place where together we delight in the unpredictability of this setting and are eager to share with visitors and newcomers. We are stewards of this place, each individually crafting an anthology of time and place that will carry us forward. We are Ellicott City, Maryland, individually crafted since 1772. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tripp, and that is a really nice radio voice. So we're going to actually open it up to questions right now, both questions about the presentation that Tom gave, as well as any questions people may have about the market analysis or the master plan narrative. And then when we conclude that, we are going to ask you to quickly jot down any feedback you have, particularly on the narrative itself. But we've got microphones ready to go around, so raise your hand if you have any questions or comments about the initial round of presentations. In the back, please wait for the microphone, and if you could identify yourself, your name, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Melissa Metz. My question is about the market analysis. It was quite general. I'd like to know more about what are the various different segments of people who come here to shop and dine and spend time. What are they looking for? Are they coming because of historical interest? Are they coming because of, wanting to come to boutiques? Are they coming to dine? Are they people? I mean, you have the zip code study, people who live in the area. But what I'd like to see is really a market segmentation based on what is actually attracting people to spend time here, and then based on that, you can develop ways to help them spend more time and money here. And I actually had provided some materials on this to the county several months ago, but I'd be happy to discuss that more, but this is an area in which I work in, both tourism and market segmentation, so I'd like to know more about that, and also how you can leverage that to actually draw people up the street. You had mentioned the colored school, but actually there is not movement between the business district and up through the residential area to that colored school. So how can we attract more people through there? How can we help these small businesses that are run out of homes in the residential area? Is this covered in your study and you didn't talk about it because there's no time, or has this not been covered yet?
So you covered a lot in that question, and I'll do my best to touch on a few of those things. First, there is market segmentation that we're running on the trade areas and on the population that exists within the trade areas. That will give us insight into the population that Ellicott City is serving on a most regular basis. So the primary and secondary trade areas will be running market segmentation, and actually have already run market segmentation on that. On the visitors, because we were only asking merchants to track customer zip codes, we do not have additional data we did not do intercept surveys of visitors to be able to ask them the kind of demographic data that would gather what the 1/3 or 20% to 1/3 of the visitors that are coming in, what kind of market segmentation we have, nor did we ask them because we weren't doing intercept surveys. So we do have a degree of market segmentation. If you've got additional data, we really are eager to see it. If you've got some intercept data that helps on the segmentation, we'd be happy to do that, but we weren't scoped to be able to get into that level of intercept survey. So that I hope addresses some of that. When we get into segmentation of the primary and secondary trade areas, and already it's fascinating to start digging into that data. I could spend about an hour talking about it, but it'll probably be more to get into. Related to your question on how do we connect the different parts of it, that's going to be something that Tom will be touching on upcoming in the presentation as well. But I'd encourage you, if you don't mind, maybe we can touch base after the meeting so that we can swap information and see what we might be able to share. Thank you.
Yeah, all of the different strategies that we're looking at are interrelated, and so we'll be talking about some of the things of ways to get people further up the street with how we handle some of these sites and opportunities that are also addressing some of the stream conveyance, but there's opportunities to tag on to that better connectivity as well. So some of those will be hitting tonight, some of those will be hitting in January as well. Sure. Over here. You could wait till the mic, and please stand and identify yourself.
Yeah, my name is Jim Walsh. A question on your leakage study. How do you account for online shopping?
That's a great question. Within the leakage study, there's actually an online shopping category that shows, and it's a disconnect, so just please bear in mind. We show what amount of sales within the zip code are online sales, and then we show what people spend in online retailers. But those don't work together because when you're shopping online, you don't really know where those things. So basically what we can take that category and sort of swipe it off the table, because what we're dealing with is what shops are selling and what people are expected to spend within brick and mortar shops. So with that being said, we please have to acknowledge that the dynamic going on in retail in 2017 is a really important one, and without getting too detailed, what we're seeing is a massive change in big box retail across the country. A lot of us who do retail market analysis really do think that what that portends for downtowns like Ellicott City and districts like this, as big box stores try and figure out how to adapt to online retail, customers are looking more and more for experiential type shopping, and we're seeing that accrue to districts just like Ellicott City, and that's why the food and the dining and those kind of things end up being the emergent pieces. So what you're seeing here is retail to retail. There's an online to online that is its own category in there, and it's been taken out. Thank you. Great question.
Question in the back? If you could identify yourself.
Len Berkowitz. I have a couple of questions concerning the market survey. One, no information was given or collected on historic sites in Ellicott City, knowing that the train station, of course, has quite a few people coming through in a yearly total, but there aren't many historic sites open, so nothing was really done as to how many people come to Ellicott City for the historic part of it. And second of all, if you go into the food services or food industry, that means we need more parking. Parking is such a problem. We have employees and visitors who want to find restaurants and food, but that requires a lot more parking than we have now. Is that part of this study as well?
The fantastic questions. To your first point, we actually did track, we were provided data on visitors to historic attractions in the community. That's not incorporated in with the business data. One of the things we wanted to do, because that data is accrual data over many months, the zip code survey was done concurrently with all the businesses so we can watch browsing amongst businesses, but we do have some of the data on what visitors are coming to the visitation. With regard to your second question on the dining, I'm going to kick that over to Tom because I know in the physical component of that, the issue of parking and how does that work is going to be part of this whole thing where we're tying in the market analysis with some of the recommendations from a physical standpoint that would come out.
And I think it would be best just as we get through the presentation, you'll see some of the ideas that we're talking about.
Great. Any other questions? Well, let's take one more over here, and then we'll close that down and ask you to jot down some thoughts on worksheets. Please identify yourself.
Ann Eustace. I live on Fells Lane, which is right next door to Parking Lot F. So I wanted to compliment your narrative. I love writing, and it's powerful in many ways. I wanted to just point out in paragraph 5 in your closing, I love that you said we're not a city of towering buildings, and it seemed like that opening is really trying to help what we residents would love, which is not to make it like Disney World or Columbia. And so I just wanted to kind of call that to mind. And I wanted to add one other sentence, or have you consider it. We're not a city of parking decks, which I feel is a euphemism for a towering structure. So
Great.
just thought I'd
Thank
put
you.
that out there. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to give everyone about 90 seconds. If you bring out your worksheet, on the very first page of the worksheet on the top, there's an opportunity to provide feedback on the narrative that Tripp walked you through. So if you have any ideas that you think need to be reworked a little bit, or ideas that aren't captured or aren't captured well, take a little bit of time to give us that feedback. You can continue to write as we're moving into the next presentation, but before we move to the next presentation, we have one polling question that we want to ask. So if you can get out your keypads again to vote. So a lot of the questions you're going to see tonight are really to kind of give us a sense of kind of taking the temperature on various different things. So you've seen the narrative, you've heard the narrative, you've had a chance to give some feedback. But we'd like to understand from you, are we headed in the right direction with the master plan narrative? Or actually, it should be a statement. We are headed in the right direction with the master plan narrative. What is your level of agreement on a scale of 1 to 5 with we are headed in the right direction with the master plan narrative? From 1, strongly agree, to 5, strongly disagree. Everyone have a chance to vote? All right, let's see the results. All right, so we've got 48% that either strongly agree or agree. We've got a smaller percentage, 23%, that disagree or strongly disagree. And we've got 30% who are kind of on the fence. So that's really helpful for us to know. So in particular, as you think about, well, when we get this master plan in place, I'd really like to say I agree or strongly agree with it. I want to make sure that as you're writing your feedback on the worksheet, that you're sharing the things that you think will make it that much stronger. All right, so if you didn't do that, or if you have additional things to say to really help us get to that point where we're seeing a lot higher percentage, that would be great. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Tom, and he's going to talk about, to Len's point, parking and transportation, and also Main Street design.
Since we have so much territory to cover tonight, we're going to be hitting on a lot of these at very high levels. So we're going to talk a little bit of Main Street. We heard a lot in our meetings back in July and from reading about getting more pedestrian environment on Main Street. There was a lot of people that said, let's get rid of the parking on Main Street to make wider sidewalks. We heard a lot of people conversely say, no, we absolutely have to have the parking on Main Street. So we want to talk a little bit about that, streetscape, and then also touch on some parking facilities and strategies. And I like this photograph because as we talk about Main Street improvements, if we look back historically, there was just a simplicity to Main Street, a very utilitarian street, had travel lanes, parking lanes, and sidewalks. So we want to be careful when whatever improvements we make that we're not futzing it up and creating something that's really not authentic to the district.
So when we're looking at the West End corridor, we heard a lot in some of our workshops and focus groups about the speed of travel of the vehicles that move through there. So when we were looking at our recommendations for this portion of the street, we wanted to look at some elements that would encourage vehicles to slow down a little bit. And one of those is lane narrowing. What that can do is it provides a little bit more opportunity in the corridor to have some other improvements that can also enhance the West End area. If you look at some of these photos up on the right-hand side of the slide there, you can see that while you have some sidewalks, it's being competed for with other elements. You have cars parking on there. There's utility poles that are sort of creating pinch points in the sidewalk, along with where you have your trash cans and recycling. So those are some things that we're looking at to create more of a continuous network of sidewalks that are a little bit more usable. Another thing to consider too is that there may be some people that want to move back and forth across Main Street or Frederick Road there. So adding some mid-block crossings to provide that an opportunity for people to safely cross the street back and forth is something that we're looking at in our recommendations. On this graphic here, you can see we've got a legend in the bottom left-hand corner that shows new sidewalk, or basically just improved sidewalk in a lot of cases, in red. On-street parking is in blue, and then new crosswalks are in purple. We're also looking at the idea to rename the Frederick Road Main Street from 29 back down into the city. So it provides more of that continuity between the West End and the downtown area. It's one of the goals that we have here is to provide some more of that continuity. As we work our way towards downtown, you can see the various parking areas on street and some sidewalk connections. You'll see too that we have those mid-block crossings that are shown in purple, and the crosswalks are at tangent sections of the road. We put them there so you can have sight distance so cars can see people, people can see cars, as well as the improved sidewalks on both sides, and mostly in front of the residential areas, in front of the houses. There is some sidewalk that's there, it just doesn't seem to be very continuous. We want to work on that. Getting down into the Main Street in the core area, we like to call it.
And excuse me, Matt, and then Barrington, to your part earlier, we're working back and forth with different recommendations. So some of the sidewalk locations that Matt identified are what we're looking at from an ideal pedestrian circulation standpoint, but we need to couple those as the stormwater and conveyance improvements are moving forward to see. There might be some areas where, as you say, it might not make sense to have a sidewalk. So we're working back and forth between these recommendations.
Right. So it's a good point, because any of these projects that come along, they'll have to be analyzed for stormwater management to make sure that they work, they don't increase runoff rates in certain areas, and we keep those peak flows heading in the right direction, which is part of one of the goals of this study as well. So getting back down into the core of the study area here, retaining the majority of the on-street parking. The historic data does show that there's a high demand for the parking on Main Street. All of the studies and counts show that that parking is heavily utilized. So we're proposing that we keep it, but we're going to make some modifications to it to improve some of the drop-off area, the loading zones, the pickup, as well as some other improvements that we'll show here in a second. Similarly to the West End, we're looking at some road narrowing. Once again, it does slow traffic down, but it also gives us some more room on the sidewalks for the pedestrian improvements. The bump outs at the utility poles, right now you've got utility poles in the middle of your sidewalks, which make it awkward when you're moving through. If you've got a stroller with a couple kids in it, it can be difficult to navigate some of the sidewalks in downtown. So some of these bump outs, what they'll do is it'll pull the sidewalk out into the parking lane and allow opportunity to navigate around that without having to get stuck at those pinch points. Similarly to the West End as well, mid-block crossings. There's some sections of Main Street where you might have to walk a considerable distance uphill to just get to a shop that's right across the street. So we're looking at whatever opportunities we can to break that up so that there's some safe places to cross, without having to walk all the way up the hill and then turn around and come back down. Another thing, we want people to feel comfortable. You can see in this picture here, there's a gentleman that's sprinting across the street. That's not what we want. We want people to feel relaxed. We want this to be a welcoming area and an area where people don't feel like they have to sprint to get across the street safely. This is a graphic kind of showing some of the recommendations that we have right now. The parking shown in blue, you can see that it's broken up by the little yellow curb bump outs, orange curb bump outs, and that's where those utility poles are. So the curb bump outs not only protect traffic, but they do provide a solution to those pinch points in the sidewalk.
And as we get into Main Street, one of the things that we really are thinking we need to maximize flexibility. So we're looking at two options. One is the traditional approach of maintaining the parking lane and the sidewalk. You can see in many cases the utility pole is here. One idea we're exploring is a mountable curb zone so that the parking lane is actually flush with the sidewalk area, and making sure that works with drainage and everything. There might be a bollard here, but then this zone becomes a flexible zone. So most of the time it's functioning as a parking lane and a sidewalk, but then there's the ability for special events or certain times of the month or year when you have larger pedestrian crowds that you might expand, remove the parking from there and expand the pedestrian zone. So you're not permanently designing expanded sidewalks, but you're building flexibility in to accommodate that. This is Unionville, Ontario, and you could see the example where that's a zone, it's a pedestrian and parking zone. It really builds in flexibility for how you handle that. One of the other things that we're looking at as we talk about developing a more resilient community, we had McCormick Taylor run a shear stress test, and the areas in red are where you have the highest shear, and this was based on the July 30th storm, and then green is a lower shear. And one thing we might want to consider for resiliency is brick or continuous pour material like concrete sidewalks in the higher stress areas, because the brick really becomes more vulnerable to the shear stress. Once one brick comes up, it's very easy for the rest of the sidewalk to be torn up. Now obviously as hydrologic improvements are made, the areas of shear are going to be changing, but this is something that we're exploring, and you might see, for example, the areas in red are areas that you might have the brick and cobble paving, but areas in orange might be more appropriate to have concrete. And when we talk about concrete, we're not talking about the typical suburban concrete walks. We'll show some ideas for that a little later. But in areas where if we do have brick and we are able to have brick, this is a concept, this is showing if this is the mountable curb, that you might even consider paving the parking zone, whether it's in brick or it could be a cobble or some contrasting material, and then that becomes, these bollards separate the parking from the sidewalk, but then this can all become amenity zone if you if you have a larger event. And you can see we're keeping the bump outs fairly simple. It's mainly to get accessibility around some of these utility poles. We're not going to have the right drainage, the right subsurface for doing stormwater planters. We think it's more important to maximize that pedestrian space and maneuverability and not try to introduce too many different elements in those bump outs. Just some examples from other communities of how some of these concepts might extend to the streetscape. If we do determine that it's better to go with concrete walks and for more resiliency, it might be hard to see here, but using a scoring pattern that's a little more fine-tuned, something in tune with the historic district, and then again, even the parking zone could be distinguished with something, a different type of a concrete paving or an aggregate. These are some examples in historic districts of just a scoring pattern that replicates more of a London paver or something that's a little smaller, or like some of the sidewalks that you already have that are in concrete in the historic district. They're very large slabs of concrete that reflect what might have been with larger slabs of stone. And then this is Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. This is actually a concrete in the roadway that has a very coarse aggregate, and it actually appears like a gravel road. So that might be something that's considered for the parking lane to just visually break that up from the roadway and show that as a different district. As we get into parking decks, as we said in the study, the Desmond study that was done, as it exists today, there's a sufficient parking resources that exist. However, the distribution is not necessarily good. We're lacking a wayfinding system and an intuitive naming system. Lot A, Lot E, Lot B really means nothing to anyone. So naming them, it could be a big help in wayfinding. But also, users must access the largest and most desirable parking lot in D through coming into the core of Main Street. An ideal scenario is that if you could capture visitors as they come in from each end of the district, and then it's really a park once and walk the district mentality. Parking decks, as we talk about parking decks, we're looking at different options of where they might occur. Where would be the best ideal, but the idea is that a parking deck would allow other improvements to happen because the parking, the surface lots are where the opportunities are to capture more green space, whether it's more active uses, so some larger footprint uses to have some of these retail businesses or food-related businesses coming in, more gathering spaces, or exposing and daylighting the stream that we heard a lot about. So those sites, and I'll talk about more of that as we move forward. The best candidates for structured parking from our analysis are F, D, and A. We're not saying that all of them should get a structure. We're just saying if you consider a structure so that you could make improvements in other lots, these are the ones to consider. Parking D, obviously because it's centrally located, A, but it also requires you to enter into the core of Main Street to access it. A and F because they can capture visitors coming in from each end of the district. Some things that we need to take into consideration are our proximity to Lower Main Street congestion, site topography, and then potential hydrologic improvements. And then and we need to be able to recover any lost parking during construction. Parking management has to be factored in, shuttle systems, payment, and or time limit systems, smart technologies, and wayfinding. We're not going to get into those details tonight, but they're things that we're looking at. Oh, okay.
Great. So we're going to take a few minutes here. We're good now? We're going to take a few minutes here to take questions on all things you just heard about, both the parking and Main Street design issues. So the floor is open. If you could raise your hand if you have a question. So we've got one right here. And again, if you haven't identified yourself before, please do.
Still Jim Wall.
You're still Jim, all right.
Lot A, wouldn't you have to coordinate with Baltimore County to do any improvements over there?
Yes.
And are you talking with Baltimore County already?
Yes. Is this on? We've had conversations with Baltimore County. Really, a parking deck there is not going to be any value to Baltimore County, but it's, they're willing to, at least the conversations we have, willing to entertain if there's a partnership, but probably Howard County would probably have to pay for the deck, or the funding would have to come for here, but they would allow that to occur, and they would work with us to develop something there if we went that route. So there's some initial conversations, but that does add a level of complication.
Great. I know we have one in the back and then another one up front. Kristen?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Melissa Metz again. What were the constraints that you were faced with in promoting and developing ideas? Because I know from some of the presentations that were done before, maybe we could have a full pedestrian area, downtown in the business district. Or I was just wondering if there were more larger changes that could be made, or if somehow that was prohibited either because people didn't want it, because it's a national road, because of regulations, etc. So how wide was the scope of the changes that you can actually make? And also, maybe you'll go more into this later, but to what extent, for the gentleman's question, to what extent can Howard County coordinate with Baltimore County about the Watkins-Rogers Mill that there's rumors could be for sale, possibly, and trying to do something for the benefit of Ellicott City and Oella on that land? Maybe, obviously it's privately owned, but so first of all, the scope of what you guys can recommend, and secondly, anything about that land on the other side of the river.
So in answer to some of this, we're getting ahead, we'll be addressing some of this further on, but in terms of the scope of what we can recommend anything, but we're focusing on recommending what we've heard a lot from and trying to balance input and feedback. We've gotten a whole range of feedback about get rid of on-street parking and make it a wider pedestrian. It would be great to have more pedestrian space, but that's not really what Ellicott City is. Part of the charm of Ellicott City is the tight, narrow spaces, and yeah, it's not always convenient. There's some challenges, but on-street parking is important for a traffic calming standpoint, and also access to businesses, and having the chance of getting a space on the street. So there come into play some tactics of management. So from just good urban design practices and parking strategies in downtowns, that came into play. In terms of Baltimore County, the flour mill, we have heard that that's it's one of their most active mills and a very viable business. We have it identified, and you'll see this later, as a big outline on the site that we can't, if anything ever changes with that situation, that's a critical opportunity that Howard County has to coordinate with Baltimore County to make sure the right thing happens on that site. But at this point, we've had no indication that anything's changing on that.
Great. Question here. If you could stand up and identify yourself. And do I have any other people who have questions? Just one over here. And okay.
Good evening. I'm Zach Hollenbeck. I was just going to ask the same question that was brought up about the flour mill, especially for looking at that parking resource being used for special events. I've lived here my whole 33 years, and I don't think that the majority of the tractor trailers that are parked closest to the river have moved in that 33 years. So, with all due respect to the owners of that, if there was a way for them to potentially look at that as a revenue generator, for things like the Music Fest or other things like that, and look at that as part of the study.
Yeah. So. And we have talked about that internally, and I believe some in Howard County have had some conversations with them about that. But they do have activity on the weekends too, and there's liability issues that you're dealing with. But we've talked about that, and it's something that's still worth talking to them about. If their operations ever change and weekend or evening use, it's always a conversation that's important to pursue. Because as much as you could share facilities, that's certainly the best route to go.
Okay, I think we've got 3 more questions, and then I want us to get into the discussion.
Good evening. My name is Yasin Diolumidi. I'm an Ellicott City resident myself, and there's a lot of good information here that you shared tonight. Thank you so much. I haven't seen anything yet on what the financial impacts are, what the funding sources are. Is this being funded through grants? Are we looking at our Howard County taxes as funding, and what's the size of that budget? Do we have a long-range plan at this time? What does that look like?
That's a great question. If you remember back to the slide where I showed the schedule, we're midway through the process. So we've had several meetings today to talk about organization structure, and so a lot of the recommendations that come out of that plan, we can't expect the county to implement everything. Some things are going to be private sector, some are going to be some other entity or organization. So we're working through some of the entities, how we implement it. We'll be exploring funding sources, working with the county and identifying some others. We're not there yet. Some of the recommendations that we'll be sharing later this evening, between now and January, we'll be looking at some high-level cost implications of some of those, because that will help in the decision-making of which route makes the most sense to go.
Great. So here, then here.
Len Berkowitz. I know that the county and Baltimore County have signed agreements for 10 years. When Ken Ullman was county executive, he signed a renewal of a 10-year agreement between Baltimore County and Howard County to maintain the parking lot in Owella. And I assume that it's close to being over, but I'm not sure if it is yet. So you could look into that. They do have an agreement between the two counties.
Yes, and we're aware of that, yes.
Great. Down here in front.
Sorry. My name's Ken Conca. I live nearby. I'm one of those leaky people in your market analysis who doesn't shop in the area as much as maybe I ought to. It feels like flexibility is one of the key design principles here, and I think that's really great. But it does raise the question of, as you create a more reconfigurable and flexible community, there's this big institutional question of who's going to make the decisions about how to use that flexibility, and so I'm wondering if that's part of the thought process here as well, in something where a lot of decisions get made at the county level, and then people have to deal with it. If you create this more flexible and reconfigurable space, what's going to be the dialogue process about how it gets used?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We don't have that answer now, but that has to be included. As we, when we write the final report and we have more meat to each of these recommendations, we'll be talking about that. And depending on what organization or entity recommendations we have, there'll be things in there like coordination. How often does it happen? What's the process for getting it? I know up in where I am in Baltimore City, a lot of the merchant districts and some of the neighborhood main streets close off parking spaces for expanded sidewalk cafes and things like that. But there's a very distinct process that goes through, an application process. So that needs to be worked through.
Great questions. I want to move us to the discussion at the tables. And actually, I'm going to ask that we combine these two tables here so that we don't have such small conversations at a couple of the front tables. We're going to give you about 10 minutes for this. Would like you to capture ideas on your worksheets. The main question that we're asking for this round is, what advantages and disadvantages do you see with regard to the strategies for the Main Street approach that Tom and his team have talked about in this last round of presentation? So what do you see as the real advantages to some of the key ideas that they shared? What are some of the potential disadvantages? You don't need to come to any kind of agreement, but have a good conversation at the table. When the discussion is over, we're going to ask for people to just share an interesting or good idea that came out of your table briefly, so you're not reporting out on everything you said. It's just one thing that we quickly want to get back from your particular table. So take 10 minutes, have a good discussion, capture it on worksheets, the things that you want to make sure that we get as input and feedback, and then we'll hear back from you. show of hands of anyone who wants to share one, not a report from your table, but one idea that came out of your table that feels worth sharing with the rest of the group. If you could put up your hand. All right, right here, down front. If we can have everyone's attention, if you could stand up and just say your name and then share your idea.
On? There
All
we
right,
go.
we're on.
Kathy Taylor. We talked a little bit about using maybe that Roger T. Carter Center site, the old one, and parking lot F, I think it is, on the west end of town. If you were to build a parking structure on either one of those sites, we were also talking about, I know, and you haven't gotten to it yet tonight, but talking about the tank farm idea of putting the tanks in there to gather water in a water event like we had, during the flood. Could we do that? Is that an engineering possibilty? To also do a parking structure over top of those tank farms?
Right, so interestingly, you're getting, we're going to be covering some of that in the next presentation, but I'm glad you brought it up, and Tom, you can address that when we
I'll be talking about
get to that point. Yes. But thank you. Another table, someone who wants to share quickly an idea. We've got someone right here. Thank you. If you could say your name.
Marian Vessels. I'm with the Commission on Disability, and at our table we talked about the concern of the Commission on wheelchair accessibility and on traversability of the downtown area. There are lots of areas where it becomes very difficult or impossible to maneuver, and being able to have bump outs that would allow for that, a 36-inch corridor to make sure that not only baby strollers, but people with various disabilities. Also, surfacing can be really important as well when you're looking at accessibility in terms of brick, which is gorgeous and it's very historic, but it has the potential of popping up, and if it's not well maintained, which rarely they end up being, maintained well, can be very difficult for people with walking disabilities to be able to catch their foot, unable to maneuver around or to provide that safe entrance and egress to any of the businesses within that corridor.
Great, really important points. Thank you. Do we have one or two more? In the back? If you can keep it quick, because we are running late. I want to make sure we get through all the presentations.
Yeah, we also talked about parking and the idea of putting a parking garage up top by the courthouse as opposed to in Lot F, which is where a lot of people come right down to the historic district.
Okay, great. One last one, or are we right here in the front? Microphone coming to you. If you could stand up and...
Hi, yes, Jason Page. Wanted to kind of raise awareness and bring it back around to the cars parking on Main Street. The cars were actually one of the things that caused some major damage to the shops. So I know I've seen in other cities raised columns to protect the shops or protect the people on the sidewalk areas, and if that's a possibility.
Great, thank you. All right, so thank you for the feedback. We're now going to ask you once again to take out your polling devices. We have a couple of quick questions. So again, much like the first or the last polling question we asked, we're trying to get a sense of if we're headed in the right direction. So we're asking about whether these are promising approaches or not. So it's a statement: creating a parking zone along Main Street that is flexible to serve as expanded pedestrian space during certain times and events is a promising approach. So what is your level of agreement with this statement? From strongly agree at 1 to strongly disagree 5. All right, everyone have a chance to vote? Looks like it. All right, let's see the results. All right, so we, for 1 and 2, 76% either agree or strongly disagree, with another 18% neither agreeing or disagreeing, and we've got 8% that either disagree or strongly disagree. So a pretty large majority of you feel like this is a promising approach moving forward. That's helpful. The second and last question is around using concrete paving, like Tom was talking about, scored appropriately for the historic district on some portions of the Main Street sidewalk is a promising approach if it helps improve resiliency. Again, it's a statement, your level of agreement, 1 to 5 here. How are you describing resilient? Tom?
Well, I think it's more, materials that hold up to, that are more durable to flooding, and that's flooding. That's the same as making buildings more resilient with flood-proofing and so forth.
So resilient to what?
Well, it'd be resilient to flooding.
So it would also be tested, so it would be safer than bricks?
Yes, it could be textured, yes.
Can't hear you. Say it.
There's any number of, they could be treated any number of ways. And just so you know, is this master plan, we're not doing the design. We're setting forth some broader parameters so that when it becomes a project, it gives some direction to that it could be worked out.
Great. So I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds to vote here, your level of agreement with this statement. Make sure that you cast your vote. All right, let's see the results. All right, so we have slightly lower on agreement here, 64%, almost 2/3 strongly agree or agree. Again, another 18% kind of on the fence, and we've got a little bit larger segment, 18% either disagree or strongly disagree. Again, very helpful feedback as we continue to work on this in the months to come. All right, so now we're going to move to the next round of presentation and questions and discussion. And for folks who began to talk about Roger Carter Center and some of the lots, you'll get a chance to, I'm sorry, quick question here. Do we have, who's got the mics? If you could stand up, I'll stand near you.
Thank you. My name is Jeannie Bolina, and I found those questions kind of contradictory. I would have preferred to see, do you prefer...
Okay.
Test. Hi. My name is Jeannie Bolina, and I found those two questions very contradictory. I think I would have preferred, would you prefer a pedestrian crosswalk versus, because I don't see how there's going to be much space with cars, narrow sidewalks, So would you prefer a pedestrian crosswalk versus street parking? And separate those two questions. And the second one, concrete paving is not normally considered a resilient paving. Pervious paving is considered a resilient paving because it has better stormwater capture than concrete paving.
Great. So I want to make sure that we capture that well. If you could make sure that that also gets written into your worksheet, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
And one thing, you certainly would like to explore pervious paving wherever it works. It's very challenging in Ellicott City because of the bedrock and the rock. There's not many opportunities to utilize that. So, but certainly would explore that wherever feasible. So we're now going to talk about some specific sites, and we want to, we've been working with McCormick Taylor. We want to look at some overall strategies that cover a number of objectives in the plan. And so I think it's helpful if we back up and look at, what's the essence of Ellicott City. The water, the geology in the water is what created the landform here. That landform informed the road and the transportation corridors. It informed where our buildings are located. We have a very tight-knit, tightly developed corridor, district that there's not a lot of room for additional activities. It informed where the sidewalks go and resulted in some of our challenging narrow sidewalks and steep hills. And then all of that intervention of development has restricted our water conveyance. We've buried some of the streams in some places. We have pinch points and restrictions. As a result, as waters flood, a lot of times they're jumping the stream channel and flowing down Main Street. So as we're dealing with flood mitigation and watershed planning, some considerations that we need to plan for, and these are things that we're looking at. We're not going to get into the details details tonight, but managing bed loans in the system, managing the riparian buffer, identifying special flood safety fixtures. In some areas where you do a crossing, you might utilize open grading that allows you to monitor and see the stream channel underneath. Water quality improvements, street sweeping, sanitary sewer overflows, green infrastructure wherever it can accommodate it. And then some primary considerations, increasing storage capacity. That's the regional retention that Mark DeLuca had talked about earlier, and some of the larger facilities that have been looked at as part of the H&H study. Directing flows away from development, diversion pipes, and then also improving conveyance and minimizing opportunities for water to jump out of the channel and onto Main Street. So one of the things that we've been focused on in the past couple months is improving conveyance in the core and looking for opportunities to minimize some of the problems. We just had some models run on that. Our team is in the process of analyzing that, so we don't have all the definitive answers on that and results of that tonight. So how can we improve water conveyance? One of the things that we're looking at with the modeling is if we could, what do we need to do if we could get all of the water upstream to reach Lot D without flowing down Main Street? So McCormick Taylor's been looking at that, identifying what improvements need to be made to get all of the water to Lot D without flowing on Main Street. And then once it gets to D, what does it have to do to get down to the Patapsco River? And the channel cannot accommodate all of that. So we've been looking at, is there the ability to do some conveyance under Main Street, especially lower Main Street where it's fluvial soil from the Patapsco floodplain and not the bedrock that we have in other parts of Main Street. That obviously comes with a lot of complications. We're also looking at some other scenarios that you might not have to look at conveyance down Main Street. So where do we have in the core opportunities to make changes? We have the opportunity sites are primarily those that are open sites or surface parking. We have the former Roger Carter, we have Lot F, we have Lot D, we have Lot E, we have the courthouse site, we have on Baltimore County, Lot A, and then we have the Wilkins-Rogers Mill site as a long-term opportunity that we need to keep our eye on. So all those sites, for the most part, are surface parking. They're not involving interventions with buildings, historic buildings, and so forth. So as we look at all those opportunity sites together, and then we look at some proximities to other items, we have the Bernard Ford House, Patapsco Female Institute, Mount Ida, and then we have the riverfront sites where there's potential to access the river. And what that's starting to tell us is that whatever happens on these sites, we need to do it in a coordinated effort. We can't look at each of these sites as a vacuum. We need to understand what's happening in the surrounding sites, how they connect to one another, what's the opportunity to improve relationships among those different sites. And especially with Roger Carter, Lot E, E, and D, there's really some interrelationship and that requires some phasing strategies and looking at how they relate to each other. So what master plan objectives can we accomplish among interventions on these sites? We talked already, obvious is water conveyance and stormwater management, but we also heard a lot of the things that we heard from previous meetings: stream daylighting, more meaningful open space in the core, environmental improvements, placemaking, expanded pedestrian experiences, and additional active uses, economic development. We heard about the leakage, and there's demand for more some certain retail businesses. Where can we accommodate them in the core? So we go back to our diagram looking at those opportunity sites, and one of the things that we're looking at a very broad conceptual level is how do we improve that conveyance essentially from Ellicott Mills Road through Lot E, D, and on down south of Lot D. Now, this is a very simplified diagram. We obviously can't do something that pure and clean, but this is the concept. And with that, if you're making improvements to the stream channel, there's an opportunity to create some associated green space with that. And with that green space, maybe some additional or secondary pedestrian circulation, that we're not just relying on pedestrian circulation along Main Street, but there's
this whole other experience of discovery that pedestrians can take as they move up Main Street into some of these other sites and locations and resources. So we also need to look at phasing, what has to happen first. The former Roger Carter site really gives us the opportunity, that gives us an opportunity to be a flex site, a staging area that would allow some temporary accommodations while other interventions happen on other sites. So if we, Roger Carter site, if we, and I'll be talking about this in a little bit, for example, put temporary parking in there, that then allows us to lose some parking or close down parking either in Lot F or Lot A to do some other improvements, whether that's more parking or open space improvements or what have you. And then depending on what this hydrology analysis results in, we may have to make some interventions on Lower Main Street before we could do work on interventions on Lot D and E. We've gotten some indication that that might not be the case, so we're looking at that and exploring that right now, so we don't have the answers tonight on that. So how does this translate site by site? We're going to be looking at now a number of specific opportunities for each site that we talked about. And please keep in mind that these can be looked at as options or they can be looked at as phasing. And just because we might be showing a parking structure on every site we look at doesn't mean we're saying build a parking structure on every site. It's like if you were to do one on this site, this is the ways to accommodate. If you were doing it on this site, these are some considerations. And we're also showing some very high-level planning concepts. So we're not designing these spaces now, but keep in mind that whatever interventions occur in the sites, we need to keep in mind the inherent qualities of Ellicott City, the stone, the architecture, the tiny spaces of discovery, the historic resources. So they need to inform whatever happens on those sites. So we're first going to talk about former Roger Carter, lots F and E. And Roger Carter, the former Roger Carter, there's a couple things to keep in mind. There's a stream channel here. There's I think 25-foot buffer, or I forget what the buffer is of that stream channel. We have some steep slopes along this edge. This is obviously Fells Lane and the gateway to that community. What we're showing is we think whatever happens on this site, there should be some gateway open space feature, something that really announces the neighborhood, it gives a presence to the Bernard Fort House. And we're showing potential streetscape improvements along Fells Lane, exposing the stone wall that's along here, and then showing an opportunity for what we're saying is a temporary parking zone that would have some green infrastructure incorporated with it. We're not showing landscaping on this plan, but assume that any parking that's developed there would have the appropriate landscape to make that more of an amenity. Long term, then we're showing that, we heard a lot about a potential green space with some underground stormwater management, stormwater storage. We think that's an opportunity here, that long term this could be an event gathering space. In both, whether we didn't show it in the parking one, but we know there's some existing screening here that we would be maintaining. And then looking at how this could be a potential open space. We don't think because of this stream, and that the stream is channelized through here, it really doesn't allow the dimensions for a parking deck. It doesn't really suit itself for structured parking on this site. So then, assuming that we do get some temporary parking resources here, that would allow us to make some improvements to Lot F, or I'm going to say here, Lot A. So we're going to be talking about Lot A later, but if we were to look at Lot F, as a location, we heard a lot of conversation about potential parking structure here. Some things that we keep in mind, this is the 100-year floodplain line. If we were to build it on the existing footprint and preserve the tree edge along Ellicott Mills Road, that would be encroaching on the 100-year floodplain, which we don't think is a great idea. It also creates, we have a hillside here, really creates this restricted view back to the Bernard Fort House, especially if this could be enhanced as a pedestrian connection on up to Roger Carter and these sites.
We're also showing that whatever, if there would be a deck developed here, it'd be important that that edge, especially the edge that interfaces with Main Street and some of these historic buildings, has some active uses appropriately designed to be compatible to the district. That might be art studio space, some outdoor display area. This is an example, and not architecturally appropriate to Ellicott City, but this is in Greenville, South Carolina, where one of their parking decks actually has some artist studio space incorporated into that. We looked at, well, what if we move that out of the 100-year floodplain? Obviously, that would take it closer to Ellicott Mills Road, but we think it opens up a wider corridor. This could be a much greener pedestrian connection up to Bernard Fort House and up to the Roger Corder site. There's opportunities to institute some green infrastructure and some stream restoration with this tributary through here to make that a very strong pedestrian experience, still looking at some potential active uses along here. And all of these schemes were showing, a terrace wall gateway at the church at the terminus of Ellicott Mills Road, which could be a gateway to both the downtown core, but also to the west end. And then we're saying, if we're moving the parking structure closer to Ellicott Mills Road, would it be better to have some wrap that with some active uses? Again, designed and articulated and scaled appropriate to Ellicott City, but those active uses could create some activity on the street edge and help psychologically shorten that walk from this location down to Main Street and still have the garage. The garage might have a green wall or something incorporated into it, keeping this experience in mind. And then, of course, there's always the option if a deck would be built in Lot D or Lot F. This is the Rec and Parks. They've developed some concepts for an enhanced surface lot, where the surface lot is moved a little further up the hill, incorporates some green infrastructure, some stormwater management along this edge. But what that obviously allows you to do is keep some of that vista from the Bernard Fort House back to Main Street, looking over that surface parking lot. Regardless of whatever you do with parking in Lot F, Lot F is an important parking resource that not only allows you to service Main Street, but also serve as, if you do have some event or open space or gathering space on the former Roger Carter site, it also serves both of those uses in both directions. As we move down to Lot E and D, Lot D really presents one of the greatest opportunities to do some stream daylighting and really create an open space amenity through here. We're showing, right now most of the stream is buried, or it's narrow, very channelized in a narrow fashion. We're showing it widen, some pedestrian amenity and outdoor dining space associated with that, really build on the character that you have at Tongue Row. We're assuming that there could be some interventions with the arch culvert under Main Street to improve that. But with these buildings in place, you would probably need a bypass culvert, and we're exploring options down Court and Merriman, a bypass culvert that would take some of that water load without overflowing onto the street, but down to the channel here. This would obviously result in a reduction of about 90 parking spaces here, but keeping in mind that if this would be done if you have a deck structure over in Lot F. And if we zoom in on that, just showing some of the opportunities to widen stream channel for both the Tiber coming in and the Hudson, and then also some amenity space, keeping surface lot for some events. This is an example. It was brought up by some of our stakeholders in the last public meeting. This is Yonkers, New York. There's a stream right through here. It was paved over, creating parking and a plaza at some point in history. Fairly recently, that was all daylighted. It's become a real amenity in downtown Yonkers with pedestrian space, some environmental aspects to the stream, and opening it up, and it can become a real feature. And Lot D is really the one area in the community where we have an opportunity to do something like that. And then the other option is that, is there the opportunity to expand that into Lot E? And I'll just zoom in a little more. Assuming that, in some communities, we worked in Vermont. Tracy Tripp and I worked in Vermont, where they took the historic town hall, actually raised it up because a stream flowed underneath it. They were able to make improvements to it, then reset the building down in a higher location. But you could open that channel through Lot E and then create a smaller parking lot that's more designed as a plaza, again, remembering that we're picking up spaces in a deck over here. And this is really one of the great spaces in Ellicott City. You have these houses and homes up on the hill that face onto this space. You have the investment you made in the staircase and the stone walls, and could really become more of an amenity space that accommodates some parking most of the time, but then becomes an amenity space a lot of other times. And then as we look back at surface parking on D, this could be the ultimate condition, or that could be reserved for future infill, and a deck that's wrapped with some development. Again, we talked about the need for, where do you attract and locate new businesses? If you're making an investment in some daylighting the stream and creating this wonderful amenity here, it would be really a missed opportunity not to have some uses that help activate that face onto that. We heard a lot about a desire for more outdoor dining in Ellicott City. There's few opportunities on Main Street to do that. So again, this is where you could do that in an area like this. Again, this could be a solution that happens sooner than later, or that might be a long-term solution. The key is that if you keep surface parking here, design it in a way that could accommodate some meaningful infill development at some point in the future. And then this is some example, wrapped decks are really a concept that's being developed all over. This is Fells Point Historic District in Baltimore. Again, not saying this is the architecture that should be developed for Ellicott City, but this deck was built. It was set back 30 feet from the street, and then several years later when the market was there, it was wrapped by housing and retail uses, and it actually fits into the Fells Point fabric quite well. So as we discuss some of these concepts, think about what we're showing are long-term approaches. Think about the relationships among these sites, the Roger Carter, Lot F, Lot D. Parking decks, they could be on one of these sites, both or neither, if we look at a strategy in parking lot A. And then look at, think about the long-term use of new uses helping to activate some of these connections, especially for investing in some amenity space and opening up and widening the stream channel. Is there an opportunity to further activate those with uses?
Great. So we only have time for a few questions. I know we've covered a lot of territory. One thing I do want to point out is there are several handouts at each table, if you haven't noticed them already. There's from this slide, from this presentation, there's a number of slides on Roger Carter and lots D, E, and F. So you can have that as reference when we have a brief discussion here. If I can just quickly see the hands of people who, so there's 1, 2, 3, who have questions for Tom. Okay, so 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll go to a quick table discussion.
I wanted to get this out of the way before we move on to anything else, but we need more dry ponds on 144, and that's the quickest way to try to save us from getting flooded again on West End and Main Street. The one dry pond you're talking about at 29 and 40, that's great. But we need one after 29, west of 29 and 144, right down below Papillions. We had talked about that before. It's not even in this sheet. It's nowhere in here. And the other thing is, at the next meeting, I'd like to see some pictures of all the dry ponds in the supporting area. Have the communities taken care of them like they were supposed to? Have they dug them out deeper, cleaned their pipes out to help try to prevent more flooding? And like I said, on the first part, the dry ponds, 144, 29, we need one at Papillions right there. I mean, 29 and 40 is great, but we need one a little closer, and we need one at Rogers Avenue and 144, because there was a lot of water. There's 370 families that live up Rogers Avenue just on the north side.
So let me have Tom quickly respond in terms of
there's a layering of strategies here. So we've been focusing on some of these conveyance, because where one of the biggest problems in Ellicott City is that these streams long ago were constricted and channelized, and so we're looking at that. We've had some additional modeling developed, and so we're working with McCormick Taylor, working back and forth with some of these combinations of conveyance improvements in combination with some of those retention basins and all of the different strategies. So we don't have the answers tonight, but we're looking back and forth at the different strategies that are there.
On here, things that you are looking at, but it's not on here.
Is that what is that?
That's the progress report. So
The progress
those are
report
things
from
that
the
the
county.
is already doing, but that's different than some of the things that are still to come with the watershed plan, correct?
That's the one here that says further evaluation, but there's no more evaluations for more dry ponds, and we need them immediately. Dry ponds, we need immediately. We can do the piping later, like you said, next year. But we need something immediate. Immediate. We need, we really just can't keep having study after study after study. We need something immediate.
Yeah, Ritzy, can you give Mark the...
I'm working.
Mark,
so let me have Mark quickly address that so we can move on to the next question.
So, as I was talking about before, the H&H study that was done by McCormick Taylor listed 18, I believe it's 18 separate projects. And I was trying to explain the numbering. H stood for the Hudson, and 7 was seventh project on the Hudson. But what we did was, so there are more ponds, and I think that's a good point that you raise, at least that you have that awareness and that understanding that we need more on the Hudson, just not that one pond, and not just a couple of pipes to do away with some pinch points. But what we did was, in that study, that I can't remember which of the meetings they actually presented, they actually had a slide, because we had to prioritize projects, because we couldn't do them all. And we only had, we had so much money to start with, and the approach was, let's do the projects that have the biggest bang for the buck in each of these smaller, like sub-watersheds. Because there's a sub-watershed that's the Hudson, there's a sub-watershed that's the Tiber, and a sub-watershed that's the New Cut. And so the choice was made to do the biggest bang projects first in each of those sub-watersheds. So I think it's a good point to be made that there are other projects, and that's the reason why I say, the expectation should be it's not going to happen overnight, but it is moving. It's moving forward. And this first group of projects, it might take 3 years for us to go from the time that we actually finish design or finish the design through to the end of construction. That might take 3 years for us to complete the projects this first phase of projects. But we do realize that more projects need to be done, and it is a very good point.
Great, thank you. If you could say your name.
Of course. Good evening. I'm Bree Sandin, and I'm a Fells Lane resident. I believe my house was actually on a couple of the slides. I purchased the house right next to Roger Carter Community Center about 3 years ago. And when I purchased the house from the county, they actually had beautiful mock-ups of these duplexes that were going to go next door. That was the plan at the time. I understand that plan has changed, and I'm all about a green space and a park. However, a parking lot, how short-term is short-term? Will the buffers be sufficient? Will there be assurances that this won't turn into a permanent structure? When I purchased the property, I wanted to purchase the rest of the backyard that went off toward the stream, and was told that the county needed that green space to remain green space because they were going to build those duplexes and they were going to have a certain percentage of impervious surfaces. Now I'm concerned about my privacy. I very much enjoy my privacy, and I bought into a community and a standard of living because I believed in it. Living next to a parking lot was not advertised. It was not planned at all. And I'd kind of like to make sure that my community isn't going to be encroached upon by accommodations for visitors that we probably don't need.
Thank you.
And certainly understand that. And so what we're outlining here is, we heard a lot of different desires for, different features in Ellicott City, parking, more green space. We're showing a strategy for how you can get there, because the community is very limited in resources, or we don't have big vacant open parcels to be able to do this. So we're looking at phasing strategies. You're very right. We need to identify if this is a temporary parking resource, put some parameters on that, and for how long that is, and then how it's treated and designed. Obviously, what we're showing here is a footprint of a parking lot, but there has to be design incorporated into that. The details have to be worked out, the screening, the buffering, and then again, how could that also serve as an amenity space as well in its design? So we hear your points.
One final question here. If you could stand and say your name.
So we don't have the great open spaces to add a lot of stuff, and the temptation is to keep piling it in. My concern is that all of the poetry that you wrote about the beauty of the place could be really compromised very easily by rushing into something like that. This is probably beyond the scope of our conversation, but I wonder if there was any consideration to enhancing the surrounding area, like the Route 40 corridor, so that it could actually be an amenity that drew people into Ellicott City, and also the Main Street, and that the Main Street was actually something that could draw stuff into those businesses. So somehow expand the scope so that we are developing the area without having to cram a bunch of new construction into a 300-year-old town.
Great.
Yeah, well, we will be looking at some broader issues outside of the core. It's at the next meeting, but we did, and actually when Marcia here was the planning director, we worked on the overlay district for Route 40 and some corridor guidelines for enhancing that district, infill development, and that is right, it's an overlay district, correct. So that is an important point, but you're never going to capture the spirit of what you have in the historic core on Route 40. So what we're looking at is, recognizing if Ellicott, the historic districts it can't stand still. We're trying to look at if it does grow and if there is evolution in it, how can you handle it in an appropriate way? We want to make sure we understand the considerations for each of the sites, and design is going to be a very important part. It can't, whatever happens on any of these sites, if it's a parking deck or any kind of a development footprint, it has to really respect the character of the historic district and not just be some standard development that you would put up anywhere in a district. But this is also how your points is also helping us to evaluate what, is Lot F the appropriate site for a deck, or is Lot D, or is it better to have an A? So this is helping us to work through that.
We double the retail space, that benefits the community how?
I'm sorry?
How does it benefit the community to double the retail space?
Well, we didn't say we were going to trying to double the retail space, but in expanding uses, attracting more, making the existing businesses that are there more viable. Sometimes you need to support that with additional businesses and more diverse businesses and offering, making it more livable for the residents that live here, having services that support those. I don't know if Tripp, if you have anything to add. The microphone.
I think your point's really well taken, where we need to look at where this plan definitely relates to Route 40, and it definitely relates to the other kind of development in the community. This could be a very extended conversation. The fact is, we work in a lot of communities where there's sort of a desire to let's take it and freeze it in time and let's just keep it as is. We're looking at a primary trade area that's going to add 6,000 people in 5 years. Secondary trade area is going to add 10,000 people in 5 years. That's 16,000 people coming into the immediate area. The plan and the input that we've gotten, and really what Tom is trying to do, is strike a balance between, okay, how can we absorb some additional development? And as he said, and I want to reiterate, we're not looking at decks and development on every lot. It's looking at, okay, if we do this here, this is a push here, and this is a pull here. The fact of the matter is, you're going to get development pressure in this district, whether you like it or not. And so this plan is trying to help the community and have you help each other be able to make decisions on how you handle that development pressure. Because the answer can't just be freeze, no, nothing. The answer is going to be, how do we handle it in a way that best addresses the environment and the existing conditions, and deals with it in some form or fashion. And so I think that's why some of these things are, and I think these points are really good, because it gives you a chance to say, you know what, if we do this, we're pushing here and we're pulling here. But with this kind of growth that's happening, this kind of pressure, you all do not want to be in a situation where you're in constant reaction mode to development pressure. How do you get ahead of it in a way to say, wait a minute, we talked about this, we covered this, we understood this growth is coming to the area. How do we accommodate it in a way that benefits us and suits us and respects the character of the community? That's the best I can probably do to answer that.
So I'm going to move us along because we still have another significant presentation. What I'd like us to do very quickly here, if you can put up the next slide, I want to get your very quick reactions in a short discussion at the table about some of the things that were discussed as options with Roger Carter site, with lots of F, E, and D, and then we're going to do a few polling questions so we can get a sense, kind of, again, taking a temperature test on what are your current perspectives on some of the things that have been floated here today. So take 5 minutes to just share some of your ideas about what's been proposed here around Roger Carter, around lots D, E, and F. Then we'll do some polling, and then we'll move into the final set of presentations. Attention up front. We're going to run through a number of polling questions. I'm looking to take the temperature of the room here. So the first one is, creating an expanded green slash event space is a promising long-term recommendation for the Roger Carter site. Tom?
If it was mostly all green space. Yeah.
Everyone have a chance to vote? All right, let's see the responses. All right, we've got 66%, so 2/3 strongly agree or agree, another 17% that disagree or strongly disagree, and 17%, we're having that same 17, 18% for each of these. I wonder if it's the same people. So what I would say, again, as we're going through the polling here, if there's specific feedback you have that would help you move in the direction of agreeing, please jot that down so we really understand, if you're disagreeing right now, what that disagreement is. Next question. Providing a sensitively designed parking deck on Lot F is a promising recommendation to allow for improvements on other surface parking lots. Again, same scale, strongly agree 1 to strongly disagree 5. Everyone have a chance to vote? All right, let's see the results. All right, so much stronger group disagreeing here, 37%, so a little more than a third disagree or strongly disagree. 41% strongly agree or agree, and we've got 22% neither agree or disagree. So again, I'll ask for all these questions, and you can find some space on your worksheet, maybe even it's the last sheet, or there's also an evaluation form. But if there are specific things that you want to tell us to help us understand what would move you more towards an agreement, that would be great. Third question, providing a sensitively designed surface parking lot on Lot F and placing a parking deck on Lot D or Lot A is a preferred recommendation. That's a statement, so you're saying whether you... What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lot.
Go ahead, Tom.
Putting a surface lot, keeping a surface lot on Lot F and doing a deck in either Lot A or Lot D, if you were doing one deck.
So Tom, the problem is that there's a sentiment that we need to talk about if we left Lot F alone, should a parking structure go in D or A, not D or A, which is saying that if you left Lot F alone, we might also want Lot A or Lot D to be left alone, but then the parking structure would go in one or the other of those. What's lumping them together like this makes it seem as though you could put it in either place and we would be okay with that choice, where there is strong sentiment about Lot D versus Lot A.
I see what you're saying.
Is there a way we could just do this twice? The first time is Lot A and the second time Lot...
We can't do that immediately.
No.
So one of the things that we can do, we can pick one now, and then in a little later, after the next round of presentation, we can do the other option. All right. So for this one, since Lot D is first in that sentence, so if we're going to be voting on whether placing a parking deck on Lot D. Okay. And then for the next round, Kim's going to need a little bit of time to create the slide, but we'll do it for Lot A. Okay? Yes, you're welcome. Okay. So voting for Lot D, okay? Thank you for that feedback. All right, let's see the results. All right, so 60% with regard to Lot D disagree or strongly disagree. Got a little less than a third that strongly agree or agree. And some people have gotten off the fence. We've got 9% for neutral. All right. Reducing the parking on Lot D to provide stream realignment / daylighting and expanded green amenity space is a promising recommendation if displaced parking is replaced in another lot. Not yet able to specify what that other lot is. All right, let's see the results. All right, so we've got 60% here for strongly agree or agree, another third that either disagree, and we've got 26% that actually strongly disagree, and a small percentage that neither agree or disagree. Again, as we're doing these, it would be helpful if you have specific feedback on these particular questions to write that down. Next question. All right, providing a sensitively designed parking deck wrapped with uses to help activate the expanded green amenity space in Lot D is a promising recommendation. All right. Have strong disagreement here, 60%, either disagree or strongly disagree, a little more than a third strongly agree or agree. Next one. Expanding the concept of stream realignment / daylighting and green amenity space into Lot E is a promising recommendation. All right, a little more than a half, 54% strongly agree or agree, with another 18% neither agree or disagree. We've got a little more than a quarter in the disagreement camp. All right, so that was the last one. Now we're going to move to the last presentation, where we're going to be talking about the courthouse site, the riverfront area, and Tiber Alley.
So we know, as we look at the courthouse, the courthouse and the courthouse parking lot is fairly independent of the other sites. So what happens here isn't so much dependent on other sites. But we know the courthouse is moving. We heard a lot in the last meeting with the feedback about a lot of different opportunities for this site. what we're showing is, one of the things that we heard was improve the parking lot with additional stormwater management and green infrastructure. Right now, this whole parking lot is paved with very little planting associated with it. So we're showing introducing planting islands with some green infrastructure, some stormwater management, pulling that down. We have this out parcel located here. Whatever happens here, we think it's important to keep a strong linkage to the courthouse building with a pedestrian network and street system. If you were to do this level of introducing green islands and some stormwater management, that would result in about a loss of 95 spaces. So it would have some significant impact on the capacity of the parking. We also heard options about whether it's residential development or a boutique hotel. We're not going to, as part of this plan, recommend what that use should be, but we want to recommend some parameters that if any kind of development did happen in this, some things to consider. In this scheme, we're showing, again, something that might wrap a couple levels of parking that would serve both the use but still have a public function, getting active uses that face out onto the street, as you approach the site from this direction, approaching the street that and facing the street that links to the courthouse site. And then this is the back doors of these spaces, so this development would really match back onto that with some buffering and some stormwater management. Keeping open vista to Mount Ida, keeping surface parking in this location. And that could take on any number of forms. Architecturally, that might become an architectural focal point, that a visual terminus, focusing on some well-designed architecture, pulling this road connection over so that Mount Ida is no longer behind a parking lot, but it has some street frontage. It gives it a little more presence. And then ultimately, we think whoever, we know this site will probably go out to RFP. Whoever gets it should really look at master planning that whole area, including this out parcel. And if you included that out parcel in there, it gives you the ability to play with where this road goes. And maybe the road is relocated, so it has a relationship to Mount Ida. You set a strong vista on Mount Ida, so it gives Mount Ida more presence. Again, you give that some front door space. You might have some open space and more stormwater management along this whole edge. The flow is in this direction. And then these are uses, maybe a row house use that is a transition from these uses. And then this could be, again, wrapped parking that's built into the hillside. We heard a lot of comments the last time. The Patapsco Female Institute sits up about 100 feet higher than this lot, that if there was a couple levels of parking built into the side of that hillside, there might be some opportunities to better access the Patapsco Female Institute from this resource as well. But it would still be down low enough to maintain views and vistas over that. Regardless of what happens, whether it's all a landscape surface lot or some kind of infill development, some important relationships to keep in mind is the connection to both the visual and physical and pedestrian connection to the courthouse and on down into the Main Street core. There might be some visual focal point or destination focal point, whether that's architecture or open space. There's opportunities to tie over to the Patapsco Female Institute from this site, and whether it's here or over here could occur in a number of places, and an opportunity to connect all these sites, the Patapsco Female Institute, with whatever happens on this site to Mount Ida and on to the Bernard Ford House and down to Main Street. As we move further down Main Street to the riverfront, we talked about some of the things that we're looking at in the hydrology study is if we get all of the water to Lot D and we have to look at how do we convey that to the Patapsco, we're looking at what would opportunity exists for doing some conveyance under Main Street. That obviously comes with a lot of constraints, and constructability is a big concern. We're looking at some other solutions now that the modeling is in place, that maybe we wouldn't need to do that. We're also looking, we heard earlier about the flour mill site. This really, all the indications that we have right now that this is an active use and they have no plan on going anywhere anytime soon, but that just needs to be on the radar as preserving a long-term opportunity, whether that's some redevelopment with the access to the river and amenity space, some mixed use, some parking resource. Also, that might be an opportunity for riverine flooding. There's some constriction points right here, so if this ever goes away, there may be some opportunity to actually expand the floodplain and the stream channel for the Patapsco on that site. Lot A, this is Lot A where we talked about potential. This might be the location for a deck. It would capture people as you come in from the east before you get into the district. Some of the regional rail or bike and trail studies have been recommending the development of the bridge where the historic trolley bridge once was. We think that's a good recommendation, especially if you did do parking here. That could create a direct pedestrian conduit into Lower Main Street where it's most challenged for some parking resources. Some simple low-hanging fruit that we talked about. We know there's been a lot of plans and studies to access the river, whether there's some overlooks or just pathways access to the river. We think that's a good idea. Limbing up some of the vegetation of the B&O Railroad Museum to just, you have that wonderful landmark as you come into Ellicott City, making that more of a visual presence to visitors arriving to the district. As we zoom into Tiber Alley and the B&O Plaza, we think with B&O Plaza there's a lot of the same techniques that we talked about on Main Street that could be employed, where some of the parking zones and that whole area could be treated differently from paving, so it's designed more as a plaza space that most of the time you park on and you access with vehicles the way it functions today, but then it could be used for special events. There might be some string lighting in Tiber Alley to activate that more, get some more excitement. There might be some opportunities even with string lighting over Lower Main Street. So most of the time this functions as parking and service in Tiber Alley, the parking on Main Street, but then on other times that could be closed off for event tents, keeping circulation here, but then the parking spaces are closed off for more pedestrian amenity and gathering space during events. So again, building in some of that flexibility with the design. And some examples of that, this is a street, a vehicular street that allows vehicles through, but it's designed more as a pedestrian amenity space. Sometimes that's closed off for events. This is in Pittsburgh's Market Square, where the roadway surface, the pedestrian areas are all designed to function as overflow pedestrian space. It's shared space with cars and pedestrians sharing that. We have very limited room to create a town square. So again, how do we maximize the flexibility of some of these spaces? Tiber Alley has the opportunity to be animated with some string lights. This is Stacy and Tripp and I've worked on Fishbone Alley and Gulfport. There's a lot of restaurants that back onto this. It becomes a spill out space. They have movies in the alley. So there's a way to elevate Tiber Alley and again get the cobble paving back, getting lights in. It still functions as a service alley most of the time, but there are times it's closed off for more amenity space. And that might be an opportunity to really get creative and incorporate some of the arts with the lighting and not just string lighting, but there might be some opportunity to introduce some funk into Tiber Alley. And then even on Lower Main Street, one of the things that we didn't talk about was the feasibility of undergrounding these utilities is really difficult. These buildings are all serviced from the back, so even if you undergrounded them, there's complications with getting the access to those utilities. So we're thinking, just accept that they're there. We might be able to consolidate some of them, and then maybe, we have all these overhead lines. Is that augmented on Lower Main with some string lighting there, just to one of the things we heard was Lower Main, there's a lot of events that happen on Upper Main with the French Market and things like that. How do we bring more prominence to Lower Main? And maybe this is a way to distinguish Lower Main as a unique district. Obviously, if we're not going that route, or in addition to, there's real opportunities for uplighting, and you have such wonderful architecture in the community. How do we better uplight that and create, really showcase those resources we have, and even the rock outcroppings, which are so unique for, not many downtowns have rock outcroppings and boulders. How do we, keep some of the vegetation cleared off of that, and maybe even uplight these and really showcase them as amenities in the feature. So as we discuss this, as you discuss these concepts at your table, think about the courthouse site, the redevelopment, and providing some active uses to reinforce connections among different resources that are in that area. The potential for parking lot A as it relates to Lower Main Street and the riverfront with a new bike pedestrian bridge connection. Ability to visually activate Lower Main Street and Tiber Alley and other parts of Ellicott City with special lighting, and then creating a flexible design for Tiber Alley and B&O Plaza, much like Main Street, that allows that to function with parking and service most of the time, but also expanded pedestrian area at other times.
So we've got time for just a couple questions. I'm trying to get you out of here by 9:30. So if you've got some burning questions, please raise your hand. One over here. One here and then one here. So those will be the two.
Yes, on the courthouse, is there any reason that there is no consideration for the water flow to go down the hill, let's say north of Mount Ida and straight down into the river versus coming down Main Street from that area? In other words, if you go down sort of Church Lane, it goes right downhill to the river. How come nothing has been considered about carrying some of that water that way?
Well, as we got these modeling studies back, we're looking at some of those localized improvements that could be done that way. So we know all the water is flowing in that direction toward the jail and behind Mount Ida. We know we got to talk further with the county about some of the localized improvements they're doing there, because whatever stormwater capture you capture up there, how we direct that. We wouldn't want it to flow directly down to Main Street, but behind, just something that we're looking at. It's a good point.
Final question here.
Will the lighting be LED lighting, and will the lights be turned off at night to allow for wildlife, lack of light pollution?
Yeah, so I mean, we're still at we're talking about the concept of it here. So if you were to go in that direction, yes, you would need to develop some criteria when it's, when they're turned off, and, obviously would want to use LED and energy efficient and be, look at sustainable principles with that.
Great. So we're not going to do a discussion here. What I'm going to ask you to do is get your worksheets out. There are 3 or 4 questions on your worksheets that ask for your reactions to a number of the things that you heard in this part of the presentation. I'd like you to take a little bit of time to answer whichever ones that you have concrete feedback on, so that we can understand where you're coming from and what your concerns or issues or what you like. And in the meantime, Kim is going to be creating that additional polling question. Here that we haven't resolved, so we're going to be creative here because we still have a bunch of polling questions that we want you to answer. The polling system is up, so I'm going to need you to, if you want to vote, I want to make sure I've got everyone's attention. Table in the back. I want to make sure we're going to ask some polling questions, but we're having trouble projecting to the screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the question that we are bringing forward about Lot A. All right, so I want you to listen to the question. On all these questions, it's going to be the strongly agree to strongly disagree, same scale. So providing a sensitively designed surface parking lot on Lot F and placing a parking deck on Lot A is a preferred recommendation. So before we focused on D, this one's on A. All right? So scale 1 to 5, strongly agree to strongly disagree. Polling is open. Everyone voted that wants to vote. Okay, let's see the results. All right, you're going to have to trust me here. I've got 72% strongly agree, 12% agree, 4% neither, and then we've got 12% total disagree or strongly disagree. So that was a far more preferred option by this group than the Lot D. All right. So this next question, and I can read it more than once. This is about courthouse. Providing a sensitively designed surface parking lot with green infrastructure as the long-term use of the courthouse parking lot is a promising recommendation. Anyone need me to read it again? Yep, all right. Providing a sensitively designed surface parking lot with green infrastructure as the long-term use of the courthouse parking lot is a promising recommendation. Strongly agree to strongly disagree, 1 to 5. All right, let's call the vote. Okay, here we've got 26% strongly agree, 37% agree, so that's 63%. We've got 10% disagree and strongly disagree combined, and we've got a middle quarter, 26%, that neither agree or disagree. All right, let's move on to the next one. And I'll read this twice. Long-term redevelopment of the courthouse parking lot that incorporates some type of active uses, green infrastructure, and the combination of public and private parking is a promising recommendation. There's a lot in that, so I'll read it again. Long-term redevelopment, so not short-term, long-term, of the courthouse parking lot that incorporates some type of active uses, as well as green infrastructure and a combination of public and private parking is a promising recommendation. Same scale. So here we've got 23% strongly agree, another 23% agree, and 18% neither agree or disagree. We've got 32% strongly disagreeing, and another 5% disagreeing. So we've got 46% strongly agree and agree. We've got 37% disagree or strongly disagree. And again, like I've said before, if you have the time, if there's specific feedback on some of the things that you can write down on your worksheet to help guide us, it would be really helpful. All right, next one. Providing an initial parking deck on Lot A near the riverfront is a preferred approach to providing an initial parking deck on Lot F. Anyone need me to read it again? Yes. Okay. Providing an initial parking deck on Lot A near the riverfront is a preferred approach to providing an initial parking deck on Lot F. Say it again. 5 is strongly disagree, right. 1 is strongly agree. So it's choosing A over F. Is that right, Tom? A over F. A over F. Yes. All right, everyone clear on that? All right, I want to make sure, has everyone voted and they know they've cast the vote they want? All right, let's see what you prefer here. All right, so we've got 75% strongly agree, another 13% agree, so that's 88%. We've got 4% neutral, and we've got 8% strongly disagree. So that's one of the strongest ones of the evening. So this one's a long one, so I'll read it twice again. Creating a design of Tiber Alley and the B&O Plaza area that is flexible to accommodate loading areas and parking during some times and expanded pedestrian space during other times is a promising recommendation. I'll read it again. Creating a design of Tiber Alley and the B&O Plaza area that is flexible so as to accommodate loading areas and parking during some times and expanded pedestrian space during other times is a promising recommendation. Everyone good on that? Everyone? All right, let's see the result. So 59% strongly agree, another 36% agree, so that's 95%, and then we have 5% neutral. Now this is providing overhead string lighting to distinguish Lower Main Street is a promising recommendation. All right, let's see the results. All right, this is pretty equal here. We've got 27% strongly agree, with another 14% agreeing. We've got 36% strongly disagreeing, with another 9% disagreeing. So that's 41 for the agree category, 45 for the disagree, and 14% in the middle. Last question. Providing overhead string lighting to distinguish Tiber Alley is a promising recommendation. Providing overhead string lighting to distinguish Tiber Alley is a promising recommendation. Same scale. All right, everyone have a chance to vote. Let's see the polling results here. All right, much stronger agreement here. 57% strongly agree, 24% agree, so that's 81% in the agree category, and another 19% in the neutral, so no one for disagree or strongly disagree. So thank you for bearing with us on the AV malfunction here, but glad we still got a chance to get the polling in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to first Tom and then Kate to quickly give you next steps. Unfortunately, we don't have a slide for you, Tom, so people are going to have to kind of keep it in memory. And again, if you have more stuff to write on your worksheets, please do so, and please be ready to hand them in, because we can't wait to take a look at what you've got. This doesn't. It's Tom?
All right. Hello. My mic's falling off. So thank you. All this input's going to be very helpful for us. Our next step will be taking a step out. We'll be incorporating the feedback that we got over these couple days from this meeting, tomorrow's meetings, our stakeholders' meetings. We'll be refining these as we move towards the draft plan in March. In January, we'll be coming back. We'll be talking about tying these into the larger watershed issues, talk about some recommendations watershed-wide. One of the reasons we focused on the core tonight and some of these individual sites is because they're closely related to some of the additional hydrology and modeling that we're looking at in the core. We have a meeting with all the with McCormick Taylor and Public Works to review those modeling results next week, and we'll be looking at what those impacts are and what the opportunities are as we continue to evaluate enhancements. So thank you again for your input. Kate, did you want to say anything?
Just want to say a huge thank you for everyone for coming out, and you are the true Ellicott City endurance group here, the 21 who have stayed until the end. Just a reminder, we have another workshop tomorrow during the day, and there will be an online input option coming out soon, so look in your email for that. So again, thank you so much, appreciate your input, and we'll see you potentially in January, if not on the street in the meantime. Thanks again.